Thank you. I love the term social entrepreneur. I also love speech recognition software. I talk into my computer, it writes down what I say. It's just like, but the software doesn't like the term social entrepreneurship. So it transcribes it in some nefarious ways. For instance, I say social entrepreneurship and it writes socialist lunch errors. Another time, it wrote so much inertia. And then my least favorite, I said social entrepreneurship, and it wrote social manure shop. So trust me, these actually happen. I'm not smart enough to make these up. I'm very pleased to be able to speak with you this evening about some remarkable social entrepreneurs who grew up in the developing world and are addressing a major problem in their communities. First, I'd like to frame the issue. I invite you to reflect back on the greatest gifts that you've received in your life. Which one of those gifts has opened up the most doors of opportunity for you? Which one of those gifts that you received year after year helped you develop analytical skills, helped you to do thinking much more productively? It is, of course, education. So I ask you, is it fair? Is it social justice that hundreds of millions of children in developing countries don't have the same gift? They'll not receive the same gift as you. That they won't have a chance to develop their minds to be highly productive in their communities as you have. Education is social justice. It's the pathway out of poverty. It is a human right, in my opinion. And this lack of education, of access to a good education in developing countries is one of the greatest problems in the world today. It's often referred to as the global education crisis. But what would you think if I told you that there are indigenous social entrepreneurs who grew up at the base of the pyramid, who are solving this problem, who are starting and managing schools to educate the children in their communities, and they're doing this in slums and rural areas all over the world? These schools are humble. Here's a classroom from West Africa. This is a simple cement block classroom, as many are. It costs $5,000 to build. Some classrooms are made of brick, such as this classroom in Rwanda. But there's something astonishing about these schools. Please listen to this. These schools are fully financially sustainable. They don't receive donations from anyone. They don't receive any government subsidies. They are fully financially sustainable. They charge 30 cents or to 60 cents a day per child, per student. And when carefully managed, they can pay all the teachers, they can pay the bookkeeper, and the social entrepreneur, that owner-operator, can make a living. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my unlikely journey into social entrepreneurship. I was a businessman for 25 years. During that time, I bought a company, little company. Over the years, it grew, and I sold it. And shortly afterwards, I got a very surprising phone call that would change my life. A microfinance organization that I had donated to asked if I would come in and manage it. I discouraged them. I said, I don't know anything about managing a nonprofit. But they persisted. And after some soul searching and encouragement from my wife, I said yes. And I had a pleasant surprise when I arrived at the organization. I found that many of those best practices that I learned in business did apply to managing a social enterprise. And so over 7 years while I was there, the organization scaled up. And along the way, I met a remarkable British professor of education. Dr. James Tooley is an impeccably polite Englishman. He's shy, he's self-effacing. He's not tall in stature, but he's a giant when it comes to caring about disadvantaged children receiving a good education. And Dr. Tooley had done the pioneering research on this phenomenon of these affordable independent schools that are financially sustainable. He spent over a decade traveling to 7 countries in Africa and Asia. And his research showed that these children from these humble schools consistently scored higher on national exams than the children from the public schools where the teachers were absent often. You see, ministries of education in the developing world are terribly underfunded. They do not have the resources to make sure that teachers are showing up every day. But these social entrepreneurs, these owner-operators who own those schools, they are making sure those teachers are there every day and they're doing a good job teaching the children. So I was fascinated by Professor Tooley's research. Frankly, I wondered, was it too good to be true? But I was compelled to find out for myself. So I got on a plane, I went to Africa, to 2 countries. One of the first schools I visited was a school in an isolated village. It was surrounded by mountains. And I talked to the woman who grew up in this community, who had started this school, and I asked her, what motivated you? And she said that she wanted to educate her son and provide an education for the other children in the community. And that hit a heartstring for me because I knew how meaningful it was for me to provide a good education for my son. So she took her meager savings, she borrowed money from friends and family, and so she built a couple classrooms. And you can see these classrooms are they're made out of simple, inexpensive wooden slats. Notice something interesting. Although you see the children looking in from the outside. Although these social entrepreneurs often provide up to 10% of the desks for orphans who can't afford to pay, they can't accommodate all of the very disadvantaged children who want an education. So these children are looking through the open window to try to get as much learning as they possibly can because they know that education is their one chance in life to escape dire poverty. And they will take that chance. So as I traveled around other communities seeing these schools, a common thread came out. These schools want to expand much more rapidly than their modest cash flow would allow. They wanted loans to build more classrooms and computer labs. So I started an organization called Edify.org to make loans to these schools. For $5,000, they can build a classroom. For $5,000, they can equip a computer lab with 11 brand new computers. They pay back the loan in 5 years. They pay back typically in 3 years, actually. And then at that point, then it is recycled to another school that builds another classroom with the same $5,000, and then it's recycled to another classroom. So that it keeps recycling, it keeps building more either computer labs or classrooms. So we are, at Edify, we are scaling up. We made our first loan less than 3 years ago. We've now made loans to over 600 schools, impacting 150,000 children. We've got a vision in 4 years to be impacting 1 million children, and in 10 years to be impacting 4 million children. We also come alongside the schools, we encourage them to teach life skills such as English and computers. We're big believers in education technology. We also encourage them to teach values such as loving your neighbor and being honest. And through our partnership with the University of San Diego, we're able to offer teacher training, which reminds me of another blooper from the speech recognition software. I said I have a plan for incentivizing the teachers, And it said, I have a plan for sanitizing the teachers. Requiring sanitizing may reduce the attendance at the teacher training, whatever sanitizing is. I want to tell you about the determination of parents to provide an education for their children, especially parents who are at that base of the pyramid. I want to talk in particular about mothers and their desires to educate their daughters. And I see mothers who labor in the 100-degree heat and the high humidity, and they make personal sacrifices to save so that their daughters can grow up to be an Aruaba. An Aruaba is a word from the West African language of Twi. An Aruaba is a woman who goes to work in a business suit. And she's respected by her husband, by her children. She has a place of honor in her community. She works in an office and she knows how to use computers. And these mothers often have almost no education, but they want something better for their daughters than they had. And they make these sacrifices. And I'm honored to serve parents like that who are so intent on their children getting a good education. So I want to conclude with a call to action. If you're thinking about opening that, if you're wondering if you should open that door to social entrepreneurship, if that might be your place in the universe, I encourage you to step through. I'm so glad that I did. I was the most unlikely candidate. I was a 50-year-old business person. I wasn't thinking about social entrepreneurship until I got that surprising call. But I stepped through. And I think what I did, so many of you could have done, especially you, those of you that have a decade or more of business experience or other good work experience. I stepped onto the playing field of social entrepreneurship, came across a professor who had identified this ingenious solution, simple solution, that indigenous entrepreneurs had come up with to solve their own problem. And all I did was come alongside them with a market-based solution of loans to help them expand and to grow much more rapidly. I used to have thrills when I do a $1 million business deal, but those thrills faded quickly. Now I have this long-lasting joy. I make a $5,000 loan to a school, and it builds a classroom that's going to educate children for the next 40 years. So I encourage you to step through that door of social entrepreneurship, because if you do, I promise you that you will develop profound friendships with wonderful people. You'll have amazing adventures, maybe all around the world, and you will have the deep fulfillment of knowing that you've used your experience and your talents to benefit your fellow woman and man. Thank you.